The California desert stretched endlessly in front of me, a vast, empty highway illuminated only by the weak beams of my truck's headlights. The faint hum of the engine was the only sound as I made my way through this desolate landscape, transporting a shipment from Los Angeles to San Francisco. It was late at night, and I could barely keep my eyes open. The exhaustion gnawed at my consciousness, but I couldn't afford to stop. I'd been on this route hundreds of times before, but tonight felt different, like the air was thicker, heavier, and my mind was on edge. As I passed a sign indicating I was near a small town called Needles, the dashboard lights flickered, and the truck jerked violently, causing me to swerve. Gripping the wheel, I managed to regain control. The truck slowed down, despite my foot pressing hard on the gas pedal. The engine began to sputter, and the temperature gauge spiked. It was too dark and too far from any civilization to risk stopping, but I had no choice. The truck lurched one last time and came to a dead halt in the middle of nowhere. With the truck dead, I cursed under my breath and reached for the radio to call for help. Static crackled through the speaker. No signal. Typical. I tried my phone. No bars. It was eerily quiet. The wind barely stirred, and there wasn't a car in sight. I leaned back in my seat, frustrated, when I caught something in my peripheral vision. A figure standing on the side of the road, maybe 50 feet from my truck. It was too dark to make out any details, but the figure stood motionless, facing the truck. I blinked, trying to shake off my exhaustion, but when I opened my eyes, it was still there. A cold chill ran down my spine. I was miles from the nearest town. What was someone doing out here, in the middle of nowhere, at this time of night? I reached for my flashlight, debating whether to get out and check. The figure hadn't moved, but something inside me screamed to stay put. I locked the doors, my heart pounding as I stared at the figure, hoping it would just disappear. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel tightly, eyes glued to the shadow outside. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination. Maybe it was a mirage or some leftover construction worker. But then, without warning, there was a knock, 3 deliberate taps on my passenger side window. My blood ran cold. There was no way anyone could have moved that quickly. I hadn't seen anyone approach. My hand trembled as I turned to look at the window. Nothing. The figure was gone from the side of the road. I stared at the window, expecting something, anything, but nothing came. My heart pounded in my ears, and I could feel the sweat trickling down my neck. Another knock. This time, I swear it was louder. But when I turned to look again, there was no one there. I fumbled for my phone, praying for a signal. Still nothing. I tried to calm my nerves, chalking it up to exhaustion playing tricks on me. That's when the radio crackled again. Only this time it wasn't just static. I could hear faint whispers mixed in with the white noise. It was like someone was trying to talk to me through the interference, but I couldn't make out the words. I leaned forward, straining to hear. The whispers grew louder, distorted, like multiple voices speaking at once. My heart was in my throat. Then, through the chaos of voices, I made out one word: leave. I shot upright in my seat, my breathing shallow. My instincts screamed at me to start the truck and drive, but it wouldn't start. The temperature gauge remained in the red, and the engine was as dead as before. Suddenly, headlights appeared in the distance. Relief washed over me as a small, beat-up sedan pulled to a stop behind my truck. I jumped out of the cab, eager for help. A middle-aged man with long, greasy hair and a crooked grin stepped out of the car. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice slow and deliberate. I explained the situation, but as I did, the man's smile never faded. His eyes, though, they were cold and unsettling, like he was watching me more than listening. "I can take a look," he offered, though something in his tone made me uneasy. Reluctantly, I agreed, but stayed close to the truck. As he inspected the engine, I noticed something strange. The temperature gauge, which had been stuck in the red, suddenly dropped back to normal. The truck roared to life with a simple twist of the key. The man stepped back, still smiling. "Looks like you're all set," he said. But before I could thank him, he added, I wouldn't stick around here too long if I were you. Not safe at night. Grateful but unsettled, I climbed back into the cab and pulled back onto the road. As I accelerated, I glanced in the rearview mirror. That's when I saw them. Eyes. Dozens of glowing eyes staring at me from the darkness behind the truck. It was like a wall of figures, barely visible in the night, all of them watching as I sped away. My hands tightened on the wheel. The faster I drove, the farther they seemed to stretch across the horizon. And yet, none of them moved closer. They just watched. I pressed harder on the gas, the engine roaring as I flew down the highway. But no matter how far I went, those eyes were still there, watching me, waiting. Hours passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I arrived at a rest stop on the outskirts of a small town, the first sign of life I'd seen in hours. I parked the truck and decided to get some rest. My nerves were shot, and I could barely think straight. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those whispers again, louder this time, more insistent. The air in the cab grew stifling, oppressive, and I couldn't breathe. Desperate for relief, I stepped outside the truck into the cold night air. That's when I saw them again, those eyes. They were closer this time, lining the edge of the rest stop, watching me from the shadows. I felt trapped, like they were closing in on me. I jumped back into the truck, locked the doors, and prayed for morning. Morning finally came, and with it, a strange sense of relief. I drove straight into the next town and stopped at a diner to collect my thoughts. As I sat at the counter sipping coffee, an older man, clearly a local, sat down next to me. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low but filled with concern. I must have looked like a wreck, eyes bloodshot, hands still trembling slightly as I gripped the coffee mug. I wasn't sure how to respond, but something in his tone made me feel like he knew more than he let on. "I had a rough night," I finally muttered, trying to keep the conversation casual. But the man's expression darkened, and he leaned in slightly. "Let me guess," he said quietly. "You took the road through the desert, didn't you?" My heart skipped a beat. How could he know? I nodded slowly, and his eyes narrowed. "You're not the first trucker to have trouble out there. Lots of folks around these parts avoid those roads at night. You've seen things, haven't you?" I felt a chill crawl up my spine. How could he possibly know? My mind raced through the events of the previous night. Those whispers, the eyes, the strange figure that seemed to vanish. "Yeah," I whispered, "I saw something. It wasn't normal." The man sighed and stared into his own coffee. "You're lucky to be sitting here. Most who see what you saw don't make it through the night. They disappear. And the ones who do, they're never quite the same again." My hands gripped the mug even tighter as he continued. "That stretch of road's been cursed for as long as anyone can remember. They say it's haunted by the spirits of those who never made it out of the desert. Travelers, truckers, drifters, all gone without a trace. And those who do get away are always watched." The man's words hung in the air like a fog, thick and heavy. I wanted to laugh it off, tell him he was crazy, but I couldn't. I had seen those eyes, felt their gaze on me, even now, miles away from that cursed highway. "What do you mean, watched?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The man leaned in closer, his breath hot on my ear. "Those eyes you saw, they don't stop. Once they've noticed you, they follow you. Wherever you go, whatever you do, they'll be there. You can leave the desert, but you can't leave them." I recoiled, pushing my coffee away. "That's impossible," I stammered, my heart racing. He shook his head slowly. "You'll see, soon enough." I left the diner in a daze, my mind swimming with thoughts I didn't want to acknowledge. I climbed back into the truck, my hands trembling as I turned the key. The engine roared to life, but as I looked up into the rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. There they were, the eyes. Dozens of them glowing faintly in the daylight, watching me from the far side of the parking lot. I slammed my foot on the gas, the truck lurching forward as I sped away from the diner, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever was lurking in the shadows. My mind raced, trying to convince myself that this was all in my head. There was no way those eyes were real. It had to be a trick of the light, a figment of my sleep-deprived brain. But no matter how far I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every glance in the mirrors brought more of those glowing eyes, always just at the edge of my vision, always waiting. I drove for hours, the road blurring beneath me as I passed through towns and desert landscapes. But they never left. Every rest stop, every gas station, those eyes were there, watching, following. I was trapped, unable to escape their gaze, and worse, I could feel them getting closer. By the time the sun began to set, I had reached the outskirts of a small town near Bakersfield. Exhausted, my mind teetering on the edge of collapse, I pulled into a rest stop. This one was different, more run down, abandoned even. But I couldn't go any farther. My body demanded sleep even if my mind screamed otherwise. I parked the truck and sat in the cab, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The eyes had disappeared from the mirrors, but I knew they were still out there waiting in the darkness. As night fell, I locked the doors and tried to settle in. But sleep didn't come. Instead, the whispers returned, this time louder, more insistent. My heart raced as I glanced out the window. The rest stop was empty, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the cab, rattling the windows. I jumped, my eyes darting around the cab. The knock came again, this time from the passenger side. Slowly, I turned to look. Standing just outside, bathed in the dim glow of the moonlight, was the same figure from the highway. But this time it was closer, its features barely visible through the glass. Its eyes were empty. I scrambled to start the truck, my fingers fumbling over the keys. The engine sputtered to life, and I floored the gas, speeding out of the rest stop without looking back. My heart was racing, my thoughts a jumbled mess of fear and panic. But no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the eyes again, but there was nothing. For the first time in hours, I was alone on the road. Or so I thought. Just as I began to relax, something caught my eye in the passenger seat. I turned slowly, my blood turning to ice. Sitting next to me, staring straight ahead, was the figure from the roadside. Its eyes were empty, its face expressionless. It said nothing, did nothing. It just sat there waiting. I screamed and swerved, the truck veering off the road and into the desert. The last thing I remember was the sound of metal crunching, and then darkness. I woke up in the wreckage of my truck, the sun blazing overhead. My body ached, but I was alive. I crawled out of the cab, disoriented and confused. The highway was empty, the desert stretching endlessly in all directions. But something was wrong. The air felt heavy, thick with an oppressive silence. There were no cars, no sounds, just the deafening stillness of the desert. I looked around, and that's when I saw them. The eyes. Dozens of them, circling me, watching from the shadows of the desert. They had finally caught up to me, and now there was no escape. I stood frozen, paralyzed by fear, as the eyes drew closer, their presence suffocating. The whispers returned louder than ever, surrounding me from all sides. I closed my eyes, praying for it to end, but I knew deep down that it wouldn't. I was theirs now. The legend of the haunted California highways lives on in whispered stories among truckers, passed from one restless soul to the next. And for those who dare to travel those desolate roads at night, one piece of advice remains. Don't look too closely into the darkness. You might find something staring back.
Thank you for watching Midnight Knocks. If you enjoyed our horror stories, please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more spine-chilling tales. Don't forget to check out our other videos for more eerie adventures. Until next time, stay spooky.